Hello, my name is Cale. I'm 4 and 20, unwed, and living alone in a modest stone cottage beyond the outskirts of Lisborough. It's nothing remarkable. Wattle walls, a hearth that draws well and enough dry straw for a decent bed. I serve as a stable hand and errand runner at Baron Falwick's estate. It's not the life I imagined in youth, but it keeps me fed and out of the rain. I've never been one to chase crowds or stir trouble. I favor the simple rhythm of quiet days mending tack, grooming horses, warming my hands near the embers. A few moons ago I grew friendly with a lad named Pavel, another worker at the keep. He's younger than I by 2 years, but spirited and kind-hearted. We took to each other quickly. We shared tales over mead in the common hall sparred with wooden blades when the day's chores were done, and often slipped away to cast stones into the river after supper. Truth be told, I hadn't expected to find a true friend in that place, but before long we were sharing crusts of bread, exchanging idle jests, and when permitted taking turns watching the stars atop the east tower. One evening, after the sun dipped behind the hills, Pavel invited me to sup at his family's home. My mother's roasting hen with garlic and sage, he said. You've never tasted its like. Come and feast. I laughed. Very well. I'm in. We rode down the trail to the manor where he lived, a fine timbered home on the edge of the forest vines, climbing its stone shutters polished and firm. It was clear someone had loved and tended it well. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the scent wrapped around me like a cloak, garlic butter, wild thyme, and roasted skin crisping in the flame. I barely had time to marvel when she stepped from the hearthroom as mother. She wore a linen apron, hands damp from washing a cloth draped over her forearm. Her name was Lady Madeline. And let me speak plainly, I did not expect her. She was nothing like one imagines when one hears my mother. Her golden hair was tied loosely at the nape, a few wisps brushing her cheek. Her eyes were sharp as a hawk's, blue and steady, and her figure, well, she held herself with the quiet grace of someone who turned heads without ever trying. She seemed no older than her middle 30s, perhaps younger had I not known. There was something in her bearing that shifted the very air of the room. She didn't ask to be noticed. One simply did. Ah, she said, offering a smile that was warm and sure. You must be Kyle. Pavel speaks of you oft. I returned her smile. Only in kindness, I hope. She laughed gently. Only that. Come, supper is nearly served. Be at ease. I settled at the oak table while Pavel dashed upstairs for something forgotten. Madeline returned to the hearth, and I found myself watching her from time to time, not with lechery, but curiosity. She moved with purpose, with poise. It wasn't just her form, it was the stillness beneath it, like something inside her hadn't seen sunlight in a long, long while. The meal far better than I'd dared imagine. Crisp fowl, herb-buttered roots, warm rye loaf. We ate, we joked, told fool tales from the stables. Madeline joined our banter, easily teasing Pavel, laughing at our mischiefs. She was sharp, quicker than I expected, and nothing like my own mother. Later that night, as I walked home beneath the stars, it wasn't the feast I remembered. It was her. Lady Madeline stayed in my thoughts like a stubborn ember. The days that followed I visited more often, sometimes to spar with Pavel, sometimes to hear a bard's tale or borrow a book. She was always near, always composed, always glowing even in simple wool or with soot on her brow from tending the hearth. She'd ask after my days. Remember the small things I'd said, the way I liked my cider, spice the stories I enjoyed. Nothing improper, but still enough to stir me. And every time I passed beneath their doorframe, the air felt charged. She didn't flirt, not outright, but her gaze lingered a breath too long. Her fingers brushed mine when handing a cup, standing a touch too close. I felt it, and I'm certain so did she. We simply hadn't spoken of it. Yet. One sun-drenched Sabbath, we were seated on the low bench watching a fencing match near the village square. Pavel was called away some errand for his cousin. Back soon, he said, and vanished on horseback. As the dust settled, Madeline turned to me and took the seat beside mine, not nearby, but beside. Our arms nearly touched. Her eyes lingered on the contest for a moment, then slowly turned to mine. Her voice was quiet but certain. At last we are alone. I looked at her. She didn't turn away. That was the moment. The veil dropped. This wasn't mere politeness. It wasn't curiosity. She was drawn to me. Truly. Boldly. And I could not deny I felt the same. When she said, "At last we are alone," everything around me fell still. The clamor of the village beyond the window, the laughter of children in the lane, even the murmur of wind through the shutters, it all faded. My ears heard only her voice. My thoughts belonged to no one but her. She didn't look away. No awkward tilt of the head, no nervous fidgeting. She didn't stammer or pretend she'd spoken by accident. She said those words like she'd been holding them in her mouth for weeks, waiting for the hour when Pavel would ride off, leaving the room and the silence behind him. And I didn't flinch either. I met her gaze and gave her a quiet, steady smile. Not bold, not boastful. Just enough to say I feel it too. She shifted on the bench, tucking one leg beneath her skirts, turning herself toward me. One arm stretched behind me on the carved wood of the seat, her fingers nearly grazing my shoulder. "Cale," she began, her voice low, and paused like every word needed weighing before it could leave her lips. "I do not oft do such things. In truth, I never have." I leaned in slightly, only enough to show her I was listening, that she wasn't speaking into empty space. "I know you're Pavel's friend." She went on faster now, like the words might flee if she didn't speak them quick. "And I know I'm older. I know how it might seem to others, but when you're near me, when we speak," she faltered a breath. "I don't feel like someone's mother." She looked down at her hands. "I feel alive. I feel young again, like there's still something left in me that longs." She didn't have to say more. I understood. She wasn't just someone's mother. Not just a housekeeper, not a figure in the corner of a room. "You're not just Lady Madeline," I told her gently. "You're you. You don't owe me an apology for being seen." Her expression shifted. Something softened, like she'd been braced for judgment and suddenly found only calm. She let out a long, quiet breath and looked down for a heartbeat. "I bore Pavel at 19. His father vanished, or the boy took his first steps. I've been alone ever since, dependable, dutiful, the mother, but never just Madeline." She lifted her gaze again, her voice catching. I forgot what it felt like to be looked at, not with obligation, but with want. And that was when I saw her, not the woman who ladled stew or swept the hearth, not Pavel's mother, but the woman beneath, the woman left unseen for too long. This wasn't a dalliance for her, this wasn't sport. She was lonely. She had been lonely for a long time, and somehow, without meaning to, I had stirred something in her that had slept for years. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I just sat there beside her, letting the stillness speak for us both. Then slowly, gently, I reached up and moved a loose strand of her hair from her cheek. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Her eyes fluttered shut for the briefest moment, like that simple gesture had weight beyond what it should. The space between us felt charged, but not wild. It was sacred. We knew what it was. We didn't kiss that day. We didn't go beyond that one small touch. But something had changed. A line had been crossed quietly, irrevocably. About 20 minutes later, as promised, Pavel returned, saddlebag in hand and cheeks red from the ride. Lady Madeline was back by the hearth, stirring the coals like nothing had happened. I was once more on the bench, eyes fixed on the lute player outside, pretending his song held my focus. But it didn't. My mind was still on her, on the way she looked at me, on how I already missed her even though she stood just 2 paces away. Not as Pavel's mother, as Madeline. A few days later, she found a way to reach me. A note folded carefully and tucked inside the satchel I left on their bench. At first it was light, "I hope you are well, Cale." Then another, "I've been thinking of our words. And finally, are you free come the 6th day of this week? Just us." She never wrote more than she had to. But the meaning was clear. Pavel had plans, a hunting trip with the falconers. She mentioned it like one would speak of rain, like it was nothing. But her message said otherwise. That evening, I arrived just past the ringing of 6th bell. Her hair was down, her hands clean of soot. She wore a simple gown of slate-gray wool, unadorned but perfect. She needed no jewelry, no perfume, just her, and she looked radiant. We supped in the kitchen. No music, no servants bustling through, just bread, stew, and wine. We talked, and for the first time she laughed freely, loud and unguarded. I told her she looked beautiful, and I swear her cheeks pinked like a maiden's. She poured us each another cup, and I didn't feel like a thief anymore. I felt like I belonged there, like the moment was right. After the meal, we walked to the sitting room. She took her place beside me again, same bench, same space, but now the air was different. Not heavy, just full. She leaned her head onto my shoulder, and I placed my hand atop hers. "Are you still certain of this?" she asked softly. "More than ever," I replied. And then we kissed for the very first time. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't wild. It was deliberate, delicate, made of all the words we hadn't said. The kind of kiss that says this matters. I stayed for a long while that night. We talked, kissed again, held each other, and not once did it feel wrong. And not once did it feel wrong. What we shared felt new, bracing, and wholly real for us both. Before I left that night, as the candlelight danced across her features, she gave me a look I hadn't seen on her before. It wasn't anxious. It wasn't ashamed. "I don't know where this is leading," she said, her voice low, honest, "but I know I don't wish it to end." "Then let it not," I told her. "We needn't have all the answers." She nodded slowly, and her smile, soft, unguarded, spoke of a woman who had finally set down a mask she'd worn too long. Things changed after that, not with noise or flames, but with the quiet certainty that lives just beneath the surface, the kind of change that doesn't shout but reshapes everything. We did not name it. We didn't make vows or speak of the seasons to come. We simply kept walking forward side by side in the shadows of our own unspoken accord. The next time I saw Madeline was 4 days later. Pavel had invited me to the manor once more, this time to watch the archery trials hosted just outside the town walls. I accepted without hesitation. I knew she would be there, and I longed to see her. When I arrived, she was in the scullery rinsing clay pots. As I stepped through the archway, she glanced over her shoulder just once and smiled. That was all. No touch, no words. But in that single glance, I heard what she could not say aloud. "I haven't stopped thinking of you either." Pavel, of course, was too caught up in the tournament to notice much of anything. He cheered cursed poor shots, tossed bread crusts at the servants, and roared with laughter at his own jokes. Madeline passed through now and then, bringing a cider or a fresh loaf, always with grace, never lingering long. She took a seat across the room as if nothing were amiss. And we played our parts well. No strange silence, no tension. But each time our eyes met across that space, it was like striking flint to steel. Something sparked, quietly, undeniably. Later, as the last arrows were loosed and Pavel walked me to the stables, still ranting about one missed shot, Madeline stood beneath the arch of the kitchen door, her hands curled gently around a cup of spiced wine. Just before I turned to go, our eyes locked again. That night she left me a note tucked beneath my saddle girth. I wish we'd had but a single moment alone. I sent my reply the next morning, scribbled in haste upon parchment. "So do I. I cannot stop thinking of you." Her answer came with surprising swiftness. "Tomorrow." I didn't ask for meaning. I simply replied, "I." From that day forth, we had a system, unspoken, subtle, but solid. Whenever Pavel was sent off on a hunt or spent the evening drinking with the lads or traveled with the steward to market, she would find a way to tell me. Sometimes a note slipped into a pouch. Sometimes just a glance across a room held an extra second longer than it ought. And I would know. It was time. At first I was cautious. I'd tether my horse away off near the old well and creep past the back gate under cover of dusk. Not from shame, at least not toward her, but because we knew the world would not be kind to this thing we had. Especially not her son. But the moment I stepped inside, it was all forgotten. She'd be waiting. No silk gowns, no jewels. Just a soft woolen dress, her hair unbound, and a smile that had waited all week just to be seen. We talked often, deep into the night. Not just about what we shared, but about life, her burdens, my hopes, the parts of ourselves we dared not show others. She told me of her loneliness, of how Pavel's father had fled before the boy even learned to walk, how she'd never again wed not because she wasn't asked, but because none of them saw her. They saw a task, a role, not a woman. She told me how she gave up pieces of herself to raise a son alone, how proud she was of him, how little he could understand of what she'd sacrificed. I told her things I had never spoken aloud, that I grew up in silence, that in my own home words were like coins rare and always counted, that I had never quite found my place in the world. But with her, I felt seen. I felt known, not like a stranger sitting politely at her table, like I belonged. Sometimes we cooked simple meals together, laughing over spilled flour or uneven stew. Other times we sat beside the hearth, her head on my shoulder, the fire crackling low, and we barely spoke a word. We didn't need to. Some nights she would share stories of her youth. Others she simply lay against me, letting herself rest in the rare comfort of someone who listened. It wasn't just desire. Though yes, there was fire between us always. But it was more than flesh. It was the way she looked at me when I spoke, as if every word mattered. As if I mattered. Between our stolen evenings, we found ways to stay connected. I would leave her dried flowers, small notes hidden in the folds of linens. She would send me sketches of her garden or a verse of a ballad she'd heard sung in the square. Little things, but enough. Enough to say I remember you. I want you near. But as the days deepened, the weight of our secret grew. Not from guilt, no, but from the sheer strain of hiding something this real. Pavel suspected nothing. If anything, he drew closer to me, called me brother, invited me to more gatherings, more hunts, more suppers. He even laughed once and said, "Careful, Cale. You keep this up, and Ma might claim you for kin." I smiled and said nothing. And Madeline and I, we kept the act alive. We became skilled at it, uncomfortably skilled. She made certain not to speak too long with me when Pavel was home. I avoided lingering too near her in public. When I visited the manor, we were careful not to sit too closely, not to hold eye contact too long, and certainly not to touch. Still, sometimes we slipped. There was one moment I'd said something foolish at supper, and she burst into laughter fuller than she meant. Her hand darted out and touched my knee without thinking. She froze. So did I. Pavel, distracted as ever, didn't notice. But she and I both felt the spark strike like flint, or that time we stood in the same room as the minstrels played. One of the songs, a quiet one with a soft cadence, had once drifted through the air the night we first sat together under a shared blanket. Our eyes met across the room. Her gaze lingered just a heartbeat too long. I had to turn away. We both knew we couldn't keep this pace forever, but neither of us dared to stop. One night, as we lay beside one another in her chamber, the world beyond her shuttered window silent, save the wind and the crackling of the fire, I asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder what would happen if Pavel knew?" She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the timbered ceiling. "I think of it often." Then she turned toward me, her voice lower. "I'd lose him," she said, "and perhaps lose you too." The weight of those words struck harder than I expected. "I don't want that," I told her. "Nor I," she whispered. "But I don't want to let this go." She reached for my hand beneath the furs, and I clasped hers tightly. We didn't speak of what came next. No promises, no illusions. We simply stayed where we were, two souls who perhaps should never have found one another, yet somehow fit better than either could explain. By the time summer warmed the fields, Madeline and I had found our rhythm. It didn't feel like secrecy anymore. It just felt like us. We learned how to move cautiously when Pavel was nearby, when servants roamed or guests visited. How to pass word through a quick glance or the slip of a ribbon in a book. It wasn't fear, it was preservation. And strangely, we'd become good at it. Like we'd trained for this all our lives without knowing. What astonished me most wasn't how hidden it stayed, but how natural it had become. I would arrive at the manor, and she would greet me like I was any other guest. Pavel would toss me a mug of ale, or clap my shoulder, and we'd wander to the fields or up to his room. Later, when he rode to the village or drilled at the training yard, I'd find myself downstairs leaning on the kitchen table while she stirred tea over the fire. Neither of us acknowledged the hum in the air. We didn't need to. There were no labels, no declarations of what we were, but each brush of her hand, each night we shared in silence, held a meaning neither of us could deny. Even when we weren't alone, it was still there, like the day in the back garden. Pavel was fumbling with the fire pit, trying to coax it to life. Medalin walked over with a platter. As she handed it to me, her fingers grazed mine. Barely. But the touch lingered half a second too long. No one saw, but I felt it echo through my chest like a drum beat. She had this way of making me feel seen, even in a crowd. When I spoke, she didn't just wait for her turn. She listened. Truly listened. Remembered every small thing. She made me feel like my words held weight. Like I wasn't just a body taking up space in a world that never asked for me. And that feeling, that quiet power, was more addictive than anything else. One evening, we found ourselves alone again. Pavel had gone off to see some girl he'd been courting. Said he wouldn't return until moonrise. The moment the door latched behind him, Medalin moved toward me, not rushed, not reckless, but certain. We curled beneath a woven blanket on the long bench by the hearth as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We talked, really talked. Not just of us, but of life, of paths not taken, of things lost and longed for. At this age, she said softly, voice almost lost, beneath the sound of the wind, I thought I'd have more. Not gold, not titles. I mean, love. Someone who sees me. Someone to share breath and burdens. And without thinking, I told her, you do have that. She looked at me, and something in her face shifted, like maybe she believed me. She leaned in and kissed me. Slower than ever before, like she wanted the moment to last beyond time. And truly, I didn't want it to end either. Later that night, after we'd shared everything, she fell asleep in my arms. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid anymore, not of being discovered, not of what it meant. I only feared losing it. At dawn, I left quietly before Pavel returned. We didn't say goodbye like lovers, just like two friends playing a role. But before I crossed the threshold, she reached for my hand and pressed her fingertips into my palm. Just once, just long enough. It said everything that words couldn't. In time, we grew bolder, or perhaps simply more at ease with the truth of what we had. I'd leave notes folded inside her herb jars. She'd send me scraps of parchment with a sketch of her smile or a line of verse. Nothing indecent, but entirely ours. And Pavel, he still had no idea. If anything, he trusted me more than ever. Spoke of friends who'd vanished, girls who no longer returned his letters, but me. You've been solid since day one, he said. And something twisted in my chest. Not guilt, just the weight of how close I stood to the edge. It wasn't guilt exactly. More like a quiet reminder of how close I was walking to the edge. Once Pavel even jested over a mug of cider, you're the only man I'd trust around my mother. She actually seems to like you. I gave him a faint smile and said nothing. Medalin and I never spoke of what would happen if the truth emerged. It was as if we'd made a silent pact. If we simply didn't name the danger, perhaps it wouldn't reach us. Then came the turning point. A holy day drew near, and Pavel set off on a 3-day journey with friends to hunt and camp deep in the forested reaches of the barony. The moment his horse vanished beyond the hills, I was already on the path to the manor. Those 3 days felt like a pocket of something true carved out of time, untouched by judgment or fear. We broke our fast, late-made sweet cakes with honey danced barefoot by the hearth, while the bread rose in the oven. We lay on the rug near the flames, not as thieves in hiding, but as something else, something whole. She wore no paint upon her face that weekend, no ribbons in her hair, and God, she had never looked more beautiful to me. Not because she was trying, but because she wasn't. That second night, we sat beneath the open sky in the back garden sipping spiced wine while the stars emerged one by one. She rested against me wrapped in a woolen blanket, her breath soft in the quiet. "I wish we could have this," she murmured. "We do," I said. "I mean beyond these walls," she whispered. "Something real, not just borrowed time." I didn't answer straight away. I simply drew her closer and said, "I know." Then after a beat, "I want that too, but not at the cost of what we have." She nodded against me. "Nor do I." Then she looked up and said words I still carry with me. "Then we protect it, for as long as we can." And that became our vow. No grand declarations, no oaths spoken before gods or banners. Just keep going. Keep it quiet. Keep it ours. That night in bed, as her head rested against my chest, I remember thinking this wasn't just desire. This wasn't a secret tryst or reckless thrill. It was something deeper. Something true. And the strangest part, we were making it work. No one suspected a thing. Not Pavel, not the house servants, not the townsfolk, not even her distant kin who visited now and then. It was like we'd built a little world of our own in the spaces between the one everyone else lived in. And somehow we were careful enough, wise enough to keep it hidden. I didn't know how long we could walk that tightrope. But I knew one thing: I wasn't stepping off anytime soon. Now it's been nearly a year since that quiet afternoon Pavel left for market, and Madeline turned to me with those words, "At last, we are alone." I can still hear her voice, still see the softness in her eyes. What began as one fleeting moment had grown into something far more enduring. We were careful, meticulously so. Every note was burned, every glance in public rehearsed, every visit measured like clockwork. We lived in the narrow margins between routine and suspicion, in the quiet corners of her world. And still no one knew. I stopped by often, just as always. To others, I'm simply a companion to Pavel, a trusted face at the manor, the lad who helps with the horses and enjoys a drink with the family. But behind closed doors, I'm the one she wraps her arms around at night, the one who knows how her shoulders slump when she's tired or how she hums when she's content, the one who notices the shift in her breath before she speaks. Most think a secret like ours burns hot then vanishes in smoke, that it cannot last. But this one matured. It changed form, it quieted, grew deeper. We don't see each other every day. Life's rhythm doesn't allow it. Sometimes 2 weeks pass with naught but a scribbled verse left in a coat pocket or a pressed wildflower tucked in a book spine. But when we do steal time, it's still real. Maybe more real now than ever. Not long ago, Pavel invited me to stay late for a game of cards with some of his fellow squires. A simple gathering: mead, roasted nuts, the dull clink of dice. Madeline kept to her chambers most of the evening, gave us space. Around the 10th bell, guests began filtering out. Pavel escorted one of them to his wagon, leaving me to tidy the remnants of the feast. I moved through the kitchen stacking plates when I heard soft steps on the stairs. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I could feel her. When I looked over my shoulder, she stood in the hallway's shadow, eyes locked to mine. She said nothing, moved not a finger. Then, barely louder than the breeze, she mouthed a single word: midnight. I gave her the smallest nod. That night I returned, the old way, walking in from the south, cloak drawn close, the moon as my only witness. I slipped through the gate, then the back door, just as we'd done time and again. She stood waiting by the fire, barefoot in a loose shift, her hair a golden tangle. She looked weary, but at peace. We didn't rush. We never do anymore. We simply stood there in the hush of the manor kitchen, wrapped in each other's arms, saying nothing at all. Later, lying together in the warmth of her bed, she asked me softly, "Do you ever think of what this is truly?" I answered without pause, "Every time I see you. I mean, where it's going." I didn't speak right away. She moved closer, her breath brushing my collarbone. "Because I do," she whispered. "I wonder what it would be like if we weren't hiding. If I could kiss you with the sun on the sill and not care who might see. And I wanted that too. Gods, I wanted to tell her that we'd find a way, that it would all make sense in time. But the truth, we couldn't. Not now. Not yet. I think about it too, I said. She nodded slow and small. It's become more than either of us thought, hasn't it? I looked into her eyes and said, it has. We didn't try to name it, didn't try to mold it into something tidy and safe. We made no oaths we might not keep. But in that still moment, lying there in the hush before dawn, I think we both knew. This wasn't a distraction, it wasn't a mistake to bury in silence later. It was love. Quiet, imperfect, tender. A love that lived in the narrow cracks between the rest of our lives. She turned slightly and laid her head over my chest. As long as he doesn't know, she murmured. He won't, I told her. We're cautious. We're clever. And if he ever does... I trailed off, took a breath, then added, we'll face it together. The next morning, I left as I always did. No marks, no trace. Just a tiny difference in her face when she walked me to the door, the way her eyes clung to mine just a little longer. The way her fingers held mine for a heartbeat before she let go. Pavel still slept in his room above. The house was still. I stepped outside, wrapped my cloak tighter, and made my way down the path through the misted fields. Just another lad beginning his day. And that's how it has stayed. Even now, we still find the way. We cling to the moments not because they're forbidden, not because they're stolen, but because they matter. Because no matter how it began, no matter how impossible, it sometimes feels this is real. Just last week, in the pale light of early morning, we lay side by side, listening to birdsong filter through the open window. She turned to me and said, I stopped feeling lonely the day you stepped into my home. And I told her I stopped feeling lost the day you let me stay. So where does it end? Perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps this is simply how it is, a quiet truth tucked inside a louder world. No grand tales, no poets singing of us in the square, no drama or ruin, just a love no one sees. And for us, that's enough.